Heavy snow blanketed Willow Road that morning, cloaking the world in a silence deep enough to bury even the faintest echoes of memory. Inside a weathered farmhouse, a mother German shepherd lay curled protectively around her two tiny puppies, her fragile frame shielding them from the biting cold too worn to endure much longer. Unseen unknown, yet miles away, a former Navy SEAL named Logan Hayes was driving toward that very house, seeking solitude rather than salvation. He believed he had bought an empty home until he pried open the basement door. What he discovered in the shadows would alter everything. 3 trembling lives waiting quietly in the dark, longing for a man who had almost forgotten how to bring hope. And the journey that followed will remind you that even the broken can become the miracle. But before we dive in, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop the name of your country in the comments below. Morning arrived over Vermont, pale and still, the kind of dawn that refuses to hurry into being. Snow drifted slowly, a curtain of soft dust settling gently over the frozen hills and birch trees that lined Willow Road. The old farmhouse stood silent, its roof bowed under the icy burden, its porch bending under the weight of forgotten winters. No smoke curled from its chimney now. Only the wind stirred, whispering softly through the pine needles like a haunting memory that refused to fade away. An old Ford pickup rumbled up the hill, its tires crunching against the icy crust. Behind the wheel sat Logan Hayes, 38, a man forged from quiet resolve and enduring strength. His face was lean, sharply chiseled, the kind shaped from something tougher than bone itself. Dark brown hair, streaked with gray, brushed the edges of his wool cap, and stubble shadowed his determined jaw. Lines etched near his eyes told stories of relentless sun, endless deserts, and nights that stretched far too long. He had once been a Navy SEAL, disciplined, fearless, and unyielding, but all that was before the untold scars, the blast that hurled him through desert winds, the blood that never belonged to him, the haunting echoes that kept him from rest. When the war ended, his body returned home, but his mind never did. Doctors labeled it PTSD, as if it was a sickness to soothe with pills, but Logan called it the noise, a shadow that followed him into every moment of silence. He stopped the truck before the farmhouse cut the engine, and sat still for a long beat, gloved hands resting on the worn steering wheel. The house appeared smaller than in his photos, half swallowed by snow, leaning faintly to one side, like a wounded soul. He had bought it with the last of his VA benefits, 10 acres of nothing. No neighbors near enough to ask questions, no memories too heavy to outrun. The wind stirred sharply. Logan stepped out, his boots sinking deep into the snow. The air smelled pure, like cold pine and distant fires. For a man who had breathed sand and diesel for years, the scent of snow was almost sacred. He climbed the porch steps, each creaking underfoot, like a frail voice pleading for him to turn away. Inside the house was dim and icy. Dust drifted in the pale light, piercing cracked windows. Near the fireplace lay a single chair toppled over. The walls were stained with the passage of time. It was little, but it was his refuge. Setting his duffel bag down by the door, he moved through the rooms, his breath rising in faint, fleeting clouds. The floors beneath him were warped. The kitchen was cramped, the sink streaked with rust. He ran his gloved hand across the counter, feeling the chill seep into his skin. Everything here was in desperate need of repair, but that didn't bother him. Fixing things was the last skill he had left. By the afternoon, the snow outside had thickened into a heavy white blanket. Logan sparked a small fire in the stove, watching smoke curl slowly through the vent. He brewed coffee that carried a faint taste of iron and the past. Sitting close to the fire, he gazed into the flickering flames, fighting the pull of memories. The static from the radio still echoed in his ears, the drone of the helicopter vibrating beneath his boots. Faces flashed in his mind, men laughing one moment, gone the next. He rubbed his eyes until those ghosts dissolved into the glow of the firelight. Suddenly, a sharp knock shattered the silence. Opening the door, he found a small woman wrapped in a heavy brown coat and a red scarf snow dusting her wool hat. Her cheeks were flushed from the cold, her green eyes bright and piercing. "You must be the new owner," she said with a knowing smile, as if she already understood him. "I'm Margaret O'Donnell. I live just down the road past the maple grove." Logan nodded quietly. "Ma'am." Margaret extended a small basket wrapped in cloth. "Apple pie. My grandmother's recipe. I always bring one to newcomers. Not many move to Willow Road these days." Logan's voice was soft, rough with weariness. "That's kind of you." "Maybe, maybe not," she replied, with a cheerful tone, stepping back as if assessing him thoroughly. Everyone needs a reason to smile on their first day in a new place, but he gave no smile. Instead, he stared past her at the empty road, then back down at the pie. "Thanks, I'll take it." She tilted her head thoughtfully. "You look tired, Mr. Hayes. Don't let that house swallow you whole. Solitude's a fine thing until it starts talking back." Her words caught him completely off guard. "I'll keep that in mind." Margaret smiled again, the kind of smile born from enough life to carry its own weight of sorrow. "My husband was Navy too. Quiet like you when he came home. He thought the world had ended overseas. Took him years to understand it hadn't." She turned to leave, calling gently over her shoulder, "Welcome to Willow Road." "We're not as empty as we seem." The door closed softly behind her. The pie sat on the counter, releasing a faint scent of cinnamon and a feeling of home, two things Logan hadn't savored in years. Night fell swiftly. The storm outside, intensified wind humming through cracks in the battered walls. Logan fed the fire, its amber glow flickering across his worn face. He tried to rest on the floor near the stove, but his body stayed rigid alert. Eventually, exhaustion claimed him. Hours later, he woke to a sound. At first, he thought it was just the wind again, but no, the wind had no whimper. He sat upright, every muscle taut. There it was again, a faint, muffled cry coming from beneath the floorboards. Then, a softer, higher-pitched sound, like something tiny struggling to breathe. Logan grabbed his flashlight. The beam sliced across the kitchen landing on the basement door. He paused for a moment, his hand hovering over the latch. The soldier inside urged caution. The man inside burned with curiosity. He pulled the door open. A rush of cold air rose from below, carrying the scent of damp wood and something living. He shone his light down the cramped staircase. At first, all he saw were shadowy shapes of old crates and thick cobwebs. Then, two glowing eyes caught the light reflective yellow and unblinking. A low growl rolled up the stairs, followed by a trembling whimper. Logan crouched down, lowering the beam. "Easy," he whispered. "I'm not here to harm you." The light revealed her, a German shepherd, thin and fragile, her ribs showing beneath a coat of tangled black and tan fur. She curled in the corner, her body wrapped protectively around two tiny puppies pressed against her chest. The little ones barely stirred, their fur crusted with frost breaths ragged and shallow. The mother's ears flattened back, eyes flickering between the light and his face. Logan froze, his heart pounding harder than ever. She wasn't just scared, she was guarding her whole world. He knew that look well, once wearing it himself when watching over a wounded comrade, daring anyone to come close. He switched off the flashlight, leaving only the faint glow from the firelight seeping through the floorboards. In the darkness, he spoke softly, like a whispered prayer. "You've come this far, haven't you? You're a fighter." Slowly, he backed away, climbed the stairs, and dug into his duffel bag for a can of chicken soup, the closest thing to a meal he had. He warmed it on the stove, then returned, placing the small bowl near the top step. He didn't push it any closer. If she wanted it, she would come for it. For a while, he just sat there listening to the storm raging outside and the faint, restless movements below. Then came the soft scrape of claws against wood, the fragile sound of hope. He stayed still, silent, waiting, sensing something shift in the quiet, something he hadn't felt in years. The walls he'd built block by brick since the war cracked just enough to let warmth seep through. When he finally looked down again, The flashlight beam caught the faint shimmer of 3 trembling forms huddled together for survival. The mother's eyes glowed softly in the dark, not warning anymore, just watching. And in that quiet moment, standing alone above them, Logan felt a part of himself soften, something frozen slowly beginning to thaw. For the first time in forever, the silence no longer frightened him. It felt like grace. The next morning, the snowbed softened into a hush so quiet. Thin rays of sunlight filtered through frosted windows, casting pale gold across the wooden floor. Logan Hayes stood at the kitchen counter, pouring steaming black coffee into a chipped enamel mug. The bitter aroma mingled with the lingering warmth from last night's fire. Beneath the floor, he could hear soft shifting the sound of life, where only emptiness had dwelled before. It was strange how quickly a house could lose its loneliness. He knelt beside the basement door and set down a bowl of water and a plate of leftover stew. He spoke gently, more habit than hope. "Morning, girl. It's safe now." Then he stepped back, leaving the door slightly ajar. Within minutes, he heard cautious, deliberate movements, the scrape of claws, the faint lap of water, a small sound that might have been a whimper of thanks or warning. He settled by the fire, sipping his coffee, as the noises below filled the room. It was a comfort far sweeter than the memories that usually haunted the silence. Later that day, Logan stepped outside to chop some wood. The biting cold gnawed at his fingers, yet the steady beat of the axe brought a calming order, each strike sharp and deliberate. Every snap of the timber drowned out the turmoil inside his mind. When he came back, the bowls lay empty. He smiled, faintly progress. That afternoon, a knock echoed at his door again. He opened it to find Margaret O'Donnell standing wrapped in a green coat, snowflakes settling around her, her scarf woven thick and vivid red, her cheeks flushed with the warmth earned from countless winters braved. "You didn't freeze to death, that's a heck of a start," she said, her eyes sparkling. Logan almost cracked a smile. "Not yet, ma'am." She extended a small jug. "Fresh milk. My neighbor keeps dairy cows. I sneak some off on Sundays. Figured you could use something real in your coffee." Her voice was a gentle fire against the cold doorway. He hesitated, then accepted it. "You didn't have to." Margaret's gaze flickered to the floor. "Who's living under there?" Logan stiffened. "What? I saw paw prints outside your door," she said lightly. "Big ones and little ones. Looks like you've got company." Logan thought to deny it, but her eyes were too kind, too knowing. "A dog," he finally admitted. "And 2 pups. They were here before I was." Her smile softened, unsurprised. "Found family before settling in. That's a good sign." She stepped back into the snow. "Feed them, talk to them, dogs hear what we can't." He frowned slightly. "You speak like you've lived this." She nodded, her expression growing distant. "My husband came back from Vietnam quieter than when he left. Wouldn't say what tormented him, just sat with our old retriever for hours. Sometimes silence speaks if someone's willing to listen." Her eyes met his, gentle and sincere. "You should try it." Then she turned and walked away, the snow crunching softly under her boots. That night, Logan sat by the basement again, carrying fresh food and an old blanket. The pups began to show courage. One tiny figure, black with tan patches, wobbled halfway up the stairs before retreating. Logan chuckled softly. "Curious, huh?" The mother dog lingered in the shadows, her amber eyes watchful and cautious. Her ribs traced beneath her thick fur ears, poised posture protective. He spoke low, careful not to shatter the fragile peace. "I used to have a dog just like you, name was Ranger. Saved my life once." His voice faltered, memories surging, the sandstorm, the roar, then the eerie silence after the blast. He closed his eyes, pressing a hand to his temple. "I left him behind," he whispered. When he opened them again, the mother dog was still watching, head cocked slightly. "You need a name," he said, voice steadier now. "Grace, that's what you are. You hold on even when everything's falling apart." The name seemed to hang between them, a quiet promise. Grace didn't move, but the tension in her frame eased just a bit. He looked down at the pups and smiled softly. "You two, Scout and Luna, you'll need names if you're going to make it through this winter. You two, Scout and Luna, if you're going to brave this cruel winter, you'll You'll have to carry names that stand for survival." He sank down against the wall firelight, dancing across his worn boots. "Grace, Scout, and Luna," he whispered softly. "Looks like it's just the four of us now." For the next several days, he fell into a steady rhythm. Mornings were for bringing food and water. Evenings he spent reading aloud from a battered paperback he'd scavenged Hemingway. Stories of courage and solitude. At first, hearing his own voice was strange, but soon it wove into the heartbeat of the house, mingling with the crackling fire and the gentle patter of furry paws. By the third day, Grace edged closer, drawn by a fragile trust, or maybe necessity. Her coat was beginning to shine again, and her eyes no longer flinched at every shadow. Scout and Luna tumbled behind her, clumsy and playful, their tiny paws carving soft trails through the dust. Logan stifled a quiet laugh. When Luna stumbled over her own tail, it startled him. It had been years since laughter had slipped from his lips. One evening, Margaret returned, knocking gently before entering without waiting. She carried a basket lined with cloth filled with biscuits. "You look better," she said kindly. "And I see you've got company now." Logan poured her a cup of coffee. "They're getting stronger, but they still don't trust me completely." "Give it time," she said, settling into a chair. "Trust is like spring in Vermont. It takes forever, but it always arrives." Her gaze softened as she took in the glow of the fire and the small bowls set near the stairs. "You've already made this place feel warmer." He shrugged. "I just feed them." "No," she said gently. "You let them stay. That's more than most do these days." They talked quietly about the town and past winters. Margaret mentioned a little cafe she once owned, now run by her niece Sarah, a vibrant woman in her 40s, tall and lean, with chestnut hair, always pulled into a bun, and a laugh that made strangers feel like lifelong friends. "You should visit sometime," Margaret smiled. "She bakes bread that could soften the hardest heart." Logan returned a faint smile, but said nothing. When Margaret left, the house felt still, but not empty. The dogs now roamed freely. Grace usually settled by the fireplace, her pups nestled against her warmth. Logan often found himself speaking to them late into the night, sharing memories of fallen comrades' failed missions, and the days he wished he'd never survived. "You don't judge what I've done," he whispered, voice trembling. "You only care that I'm here." Grace lifted her head, locking eyes with him, soft, forgiving. She stepped closer, the faint click of her claws echoing in the hush. Slowly she pressed her cold nose into his hand. Her breath was steady and warm. For a long moment, Logan remained still. That touch was something he thought he'd lost forever. Trust, maybe, or grace itself. He curled his fingers into her fur, coarse but alive. The pup stirred beside her, tiny bodies rising and falling with each breath. In that fragile silence, snow falling gently outside, Logan smiled. A genuine human smile, the first since leaving the Navy. Grace licked his hand once, sealing an unspoken promise between them. The fire crackled softly as the wind whispered through the tall pines. For the first time in many years, he no longer felt alone. By the time the sun slipped behind Vermont's rolling hills, the storm had begun its slow, relentless crawl down the valley. Snow swirled in thick, swirling ribbons, driven by a wind sharp and fierce enough to gnaw through bone. Logan Hayes stood beside the old farmhouse window, watching the swirling flakes press against the glass, until the outside world blurred into a ghostly haze. The forecast had warned of this blizzard 2 days earlier, but here on Willow Road, warnings held little power. Winter carved its own rules in this land. Near the basement door, Grace paced nervously, her tail twitching in tense, quick bursts. Scout and Luna nestled close to her, the smaller pup trembling with each fierce gust that rattled the weathered boards. Logan crouched down, fingers raking through his short, gray-streaked hair. "All right," he whispered gently. "No more hiding in the basement tonight." Slowly, he extended his palms to Grace. This time she didn't shy away. Instead, she exhaled softly, her warm breath brushing his wrist. He lifted the pups first, Scout wriggling in his arms. Luna whining quietly, then helped Grace carefully up the creaky stairs. Her gait was unsteady. When she reached the top, Logan noticed her left hind leg trembling under her weight. The fur around that leg was patchy and scarred. He whispered, "Take it easy, girl. You're safe now." He spread an old blanket by the fireplace and layered another atop it to bring warmth. The dogs settled swiftly. The pups pressed close against their mother's belly. Grace's eyes followed Logan as he moved around the room, tending the fire, fetching water, setting out food. When he knelt beside her again, the firelight revealed more of her wound-matted fur parted to show a faint band of scar tissue circling her ankle. Too exact to be natural. He'd seen marks like this before. On dogs trained for duty. On soldiers, too. This was a mark of restraint of something or someone who never cared. His jaw clenched tight. "Someone tied you up, didn't they?" he murmured. Grace's ears flicked back, her eyes tender yet haunted. Anger swelled inside him, not at her, but at the cruelty that could wound both body and soul. He pulled a small first aid kit from his bag and returned, softly speaking, as he cleaned her wound. "You don't have to fight anymore. Not here." Outside, the wind howled through the trees, rattling shutters like distant war drums. Inside, the house felt alive, wrapped in warmth. The fire cast a golden glow, painting shadows that danced softly across the wooden floor. Logan leaned back against the wall, watching Grace slip into peaceful sleep. Scout's little paws twitched in dream's embrace, and Luna released a soft, content sigh. A sudden knock at the door startled him. For a moment he thought it was the storm itself. Almost swallowed whole by the storm, Logan grabbed her arm, pulling her inside. "You're out of your mind," he said urgently. She brushed the snow off her scarf with a quiet smile. "I've heard worse," she replied, holding up the thermos. "Brought soup. You can't survive on coffee alone in this cold." Taking the thermos from her trembling hands, he said softly, "You shouldn't have come out here." Margaret's eyes drifted toward the hearth, where the dogs lay curled up peaceful in the firelight. "Looks like I'm not the only fool seeking company tonight," she murmured. A gentle smile touched her lips, her gaze softening. "She's beautiful." "What's her name?" Logan replied quietly. "Grace." "The pups are Scout and Luna," Margaret said, lowering herself by the fire, with a slow creak of her joints. She extended her hand, careful and deliberate, letting Grace sniff it. "Well, Grace," she whispered, "you found a good place to hide." They sat together for a long moment, listening as the storm clawed relentlessly at the cabin's roof. Finally, Margaret spoke again, her voice low and somber. "Ever notice the river down the hill?" "Yeah," Logan said. "Walked by it last week, smelled strange like metal." Her face darkened at the memory. "You're right. My son worked construction on a development project up there 15 years ago. They called it a clean water pipeline," she said. "He was a good man, careful, always double-checking everything. Then one day, the scaffolding gave way. They said it was an accident, but none of the reports ever added up. 2 weeks later, the same company secured a permit to dump waste into the lower river. Ever since, I've hated that silence." Logan looked at her, reading the strength carved deep beneath the lines of grief on her face, a resilience he knew well. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. She shook her head. "Don't be. Just don't ignore the stench. Some things rot in silence before anyone dares to speak up." The fire crackled sharply in the silence between them. Grace lifted her head ears, twitching alertly. Outside, the blizzard howled furiously against the windows. Margaret rose, pulling her coat tight around her. "I better get home before the road closes," she said. "You'll be all right. I'll manage," Logan assured her. She gave him a final look, a half-smile filled with caution and blessing both. "Keep that fire burning, Logan Hayes. Sometimes that's all we can do." Then she stepped out into the swirling white, the door closing softly behind her. Logan leaned back, listening as the storm swallowed her footsteps. Her words echoed in his mind about the river, about her son's untimely death. His eyes fell on the scar encircling Grace's leg. For the first time, the silence around them felt less peaceful, more watchful. He returned to the firelight. Grace was awake now, her amber eyes fixed on him as he knelt beside her. "You've seen the dark side of men, haven't you?" he whispered. Maybe that's why we ended up together." He reached out once more. This time she did not recoil. His fingers ran gently through her fur, careful to avoid the wounded area. Her breath steadied, her body melting against his knee in trust. Hours slipped by as the storm raged outside, bending the tall pines, howling like a wounded creature. But inside the cabin radiated warmth and calm. Logan stretched out beside the dogs, the blanket tucked to his chin. The little pups nestled close, their small, warm bodies pressed to his arm. Grace rested her head against his shoulder, her breathing soft and steady. Gazing into the flickering fire, he whispered almost without thinking, "You don't have to fight anymore, Grace. You're home now." Her tail thudded softly against the floor as if she truly understood. Outside, the wind howled fiercely, slamming icy snow against the window panes. But inside the farmhouse, the air was still warm with heat and alive with the steady rhythm of 3 beating hearts. Logan closed his eyes, and for the first time since leaving the Navy, sleep came gently free of restless dreams. Beyond the walls, the world was a harsh, unforgiving white. But inside it was warm, vibrant, brimming with life and breath. When he awoke just before dawn, the storm still murmuring softly through the eaves, the first sound he caught was the steady, soothing breath of the mother dog and her pups. A delicate harmony that felt like the first whisper of peace. 2 days later, the storm broke, leaving the valley cloaked in silence and shimmering silver. Outside the farmhouse, the morning sun cast a pale glow over the sparkling landscape. Snow stretched smooth and unbroken, the bitter cold biting with every breath. Logan Hayes stood on the porch, the wooden boards creaking beneath his boots. Grace walked beside him, her coat shining gold and black in the light. Scout and Luna darted through the snow, their little legs disappearing into drifts as they chased the shadows of their own breath. It had been a week since the blizzard. The roof was repaired, firewood piled high, and for the first time the old house carried the faint scent of life, coffee, damp fur, and comforting warmth. But even peace held its warning signs. Logan had sensed it for days. The wind carried a faint metallic tang whenever it blew from the south, toward the river. That morning he decided to take Grace with him there. The sky stretched brittle and pale like glass, ready to shatter under a steady gaze. He whistled low, "Come on, girl. Let's see what secrets lie beneath all this ice." The path to the river was narrow and winding, marked only by deer tracks and the faded outlines of broken fence posts. Clouds of breath escaped Logan's lips. Grace moved ahead briskly, tail raised, proudly nose close to the earth. She walked with the keen precision of a soldier, ears twitching, eyes scanning the horizon. The pups followed, but turned back once the snow deepened, circling back to the porch. Grace glanced over her shoulder once, then pressed on beside Logan. When they reached the riverbank, he stopped suddenly. The water's surface was frozen solid but uneven. Across the icy expanse, dark streaks bled through like bruises beneath fragile skin. Logan knelt and brushed snow away with his gloved hand. Beneath the clear ice, oily swirls caught the light ribbons of unnatural color. The air carried a sharp, acrid scent, faint but unmistakable. A twist of pain gripped his chest. The smell carried memory. For a moment, the world slipped away, replaced by sand and relentless sun. He was back in Kandahar, 2008. A convoy stalled by a river slick with burning fuel. His teammate Corporal Janssen crouched by the bank, dipping a hand into the water's grim surface. The explosion came minutes later, contaminated fuel lines, chemical runoff from the plant nearby. He could still see the expression on Janssen's face before the flames claimed him: confusion, then an endless void. Logan squeezed his eyes shut against the blinding white snow swirling around him. He breathed softly into the chilled air. Not again. Grace nudged him gently, pulling him back from his thoughts. Her amber eyes searched his weathered face. "You feel it too, don't you?" he murmured. He crouched beside her, fingers gliding through her thick fur. "Someone's dumping waste here. This isn't just decay." Grace growled faintly, her nose pressed firmly against the frosty ground. She began tracking an unseen scent along the riverbank. Logan followed silently as she ventured farther downstream, sniffing and pawing at the thick ice. Grace halted at a cluster of reeds frozen stiff. There, half hidden beneath the snow, faint but unmistakable impressions of heavy tire tracks marked the earth. The grooves were deep, broad, too massive for a standard pickup. Something industrial, maybe. Logan pulled out his phone, snapping a few quick photos, even as the battery flickered weakly in the biting cold. "Good girl," he whispered, voice thick with resolve. "This is something serious." That afternoon, Logan stopped at a cozy cafe in town for supplies. Maple and Grain, run by Margaret's niece, Sarah Whitfield, was warm and inviting, filled with the aroma of fresh bread and rich coffee. Sarah stood behind the counter, tall and slender, her chestnut hair pinned loosely in a bun, her fair skin dotted with freckles, her smile quick and sincere, radiating from her gentle green eyes. Wearing a faded denim apron and a silver ring that caught the light as she poured coffee, she greeted him. "You must be Logan. Aunt Margaret's been talking about you, says you're the new recluse on Willow Road." Logan raised an eyebrow. "That's what she calls me." Sarah's grin deepened. "And a lot more. Don't worry, she likes you." "That's her way of saying you're interesting." Logan ordered a coffee and some dog food, his voice low but polite. When he mentioned the river, Sarah's smile wavered. "You smelled it too?" she asked quietly. "Yeah, something's definitely wrong." She hesitated, glancing out the window where snow blanketed the glass. "People have been whispering about it. Vermont Aquacorp built a processing plant upstream 3 years ago," she said. "Promised jobs and clean water. But last summer half the fish in Miller Creek washed up dead. The sheriff called it natural," she added with a shrug. Before Logan could ask more, the cafe door swung open and a man in uniform stepped inside, shaking off the mounting snow. He was tall, in his mid-40s, with close-cropped blonde hair and a square jaw shadowed by stubble. His piercing blue eyes had a steady, calculating gaze. His coat bore the Vermont State Police badge. Sarah smiled, though her eyes didn't quite brighten. "Sheriff Bennett morning." "Morning, Sarah." He nodded, then turned to Logan. "You must be Hayes. Margaret told me you're new around here." Logan straightened slightly, meeting the sheriff's firm handshake. "Tom Bennett. I was one of Margaret's students long ago. Good woman, awful pie," he joked. Logan returned the handshake steady, but guarded. "She mentioned you," Tom said, eyes narrowing. "Also that you've been asking questions about the river." Logan met his stare head-on, voice calm but resolute. "I saw something this morning. Oil beneath the ice has a chemical stench. The road crews don't take kindly to strangers poking around." Logan's face hardened, shadowed with suspicion. "That's supposed to intimidate me," Tom sighed, fingers running through his gloved hair. "No, it's meant to spare you a headache." "Why? You look like a man who's already carried enough burdens." He turned toward the door, but hesitated for a moment. "Enjoy your coffee, Hayes. Try to stay out of trouble." When he left, Sarah's brow furrowed with concern. "He's not a bad guy, you know. Just worn down by life. Lost his brother to an overdose 2 years back. Sometimes the law turns brave souls into cowards." Logan nodded slowly, eyes distant. "I've seen that all too often." He stepped out as the sky dimmed with gathering clouds. The drive home was silent, a quiet, filled with unspoken words that hummed beneath the stillness. That night he sat by the window with Grace at his side. The fire crackled softly, while outside the moonlight made the snow shimmer faintly. Below stretched the valley, the river's dark ribbon cutting through the whiteness like a lifeline. Then, far on the horizon's edge, a flicker caught his eye. Steady headlights too deliberate to be chance moving slow along the ridge near the water's edge. A truck, maybe more than one. Grace's ears perked up, and a low growl rumbled from deep within her. Logan reached down, placing a steady hand on her head. "Yeah," he whispered. "I see it too." The lights vanished behind the trees. Silence returned, thicker and heavier than before. He shifted his gaze back to the fire eyes, sharpening. "I know," he murmured low. "Girl, I smell it too." the same rotten scent that trails every lie. Outside, the wind stirred again, carrying the faint metallic breath of the river frozen beneath its icy cover. The next morning, those distant truck lights reappeared. Logan woke just before dawn. The world outside the farmhouse lay muted in soft shades of gray. The air hung thick with the sharp scent of iron and frost. He pulled on his heavy coat, double-checked his camera batteries, and looked down at Grace. The German shepherd stood alert by the door, her ears sharply pricked and amber eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. Scout and Luna were tangled in a youthful jumble of paws and fur near the fireplace, too young yet to sense the quiet tension in their master's stance. "Stay close today," Logan whispered, fastening Grace's leash but keeping it slack. "We're just going to take a look." He slung his pack over his shoulder, packed with bottled water, a flashlight, and the pistol he prayed he'd never have to draw. Outside, the cold struck hard, the kind that bites every breath with icy sting. The snow crusted firm from the freeze overnight, brittle and cracking beneath his boots. He retraced the path he and Grace had taken days ago, heading south toward the river. The wind hissed low through the pines, carrying whispers he couldn't quite catch. The tire tracks they had spotted before were mostly washed away, yet faint impressions remained where sunlight hadn't reached. Logan crouched and brushed the snow aside with his gloved hand. Deep tread heavy and industrial, the mark of a truck hauling a heavy load, maybe barrels. Grace sniffed the airtail, calm but steady. She moved forward again, nose close to the frozen ground. Her steps were sure and practiced. She wasn't just following scent. She was hunting truth with the unwavering loyalty and fierce spirit that only a bond like theirs could forge. She read the tale the land whispered fresh tracks tangled with older prints, while the scent of diesel clung stubbornly to the icy air. They trekked nearly an hour before the path bent past the river, where the trees thickened and the earth dipped into a shadowed hollow. There, concealed behind a line of spruce, a warehouse stood long, low, and forsaken, its metal siding mottled with rust as time gnawed at its surface. A faded sign leaned half-buried in snow, bearing the mark "Property of Vermont Aqua Corp." Logan exhaled slowly. Well, here it is. Though lifeless in appearance, the snow surrounding it told a different tale. Fresh tire marks, footprints, even a half-smoked cigarette stubbed out near the loading dock. Grace growled quietly. Logan glanced at her urging silence. He withdrew his camera from his pack and zoomed in on the wide steel doors. The company's emblem, a blue drop encased by a green leaf, spanned across the side, its purity mocking in the cold light. He edged closer, crouching as he reached the building's side. A narrow crack in the doorframe let a faint glow escape. Peering inside, he saw rows of barrels lined up across the concrete floor, each branded with that same emblem. Some barrels were marked for industrial solvent disposal batch 4 alpha. Others spelled out hazardous waste plainly. His heart quickened with the weight of the truth. Steady fingers captured photo after photo. Proof. Behind him, Grace's ears perked sharply. Scout and Luna had crept along despite his earlier command to stay put. The pups nosed around the edge of the loading dock, tails wagging cautiously, soft barks echoing faintly in the still hollow. Logan froze. "No, stay silent," he whispered, but it was too late. A door slammed from inside the warehouse. Footsteps followed voices, rough and uncertain male. "You hear that one?" asked. Another voice snapped back sharply, commanding, "Outside, check the perimeter." Logan's gut tightened. He gripped the leash, pulling Grace in close. "Go," he breathed. Grace nudged the pups protectively with her muzzle. They slipped behind a row of snow-laden crates. Logan crouched low, eyes scanning sharply. 2 men stepped from the side entrance, clad in thick parkas, with reflective stripes gear worn by heavy transport workers. One was tall and gaunt, his pale face drawn tight beneath a scruffy beard. The other was stockier, broad shoulders, straining against his coat, carrying a flashlight, whose beam cut through the snow. Their boots crunched harshly on the frozen ground, voices murmuring threats of wolves and trespassers. Logan pressed himself to a tree trunk, steadying his heartbeat, calculating every thought. He'd navigated danger before, not here, but in darker shadows where one mistake meant death. As their voices faded toward the building's north side, he signaled Grace. She moved like a ghost pup's close at her heels, 3 shadows gliding through the draped snow. When they reached the tree line, the wind rose suddenly, a sharp gust scattering powder into the air like a white veil. Logan welcomed the cover, slipping through the drift, climbing the ridge, vanishing into the blizzard's edge, just as a shout rang out behind them. Someone had been here. The wind howled louder, erasing their footsteps as quickly as they were made. Logan staggered forward, half running, half stumbling through the storm. His breath came in ragged gasps, the camera clutched to his chest like a sacred talisman. Grace ran at his side, her eyes shining bright, the pups panting fiercely but holding their pace. When they reached the river crossing, the world had narrowed to just a few feet of sight. Logan paused, catching what little breath he could. His face burned under the biting cold lashes rimmed with frost. Grace pressed close against his leg, gently licking the snow from her pup's fur. They didn't stop until the farmhouse emerged a ghostly shape through the swirling white. Inside, Logan let his camera fall onto the table and sank into a chair, utterly spent. Grace curled up at his feet, drained of energy. The pups collapsed near the fire, their little chests rising and falling rapidly. Later that night, when the storm finally eased, Margaret appeared at the door, wrapped tightly in her heavy wool coat. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes sharp with concern. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said softly. "Maybe I have," Logan murmured, pouring her a cup of coffee. He held out the camera, showing her the photos. As she scrolled through, her face turned pale. "Vermont Aqua," she breathed. "My husband worked there years ago. He was an inspector. He uncovered discrepancies in their waste reports. When he tried to report it, they claimed it was a clerical mistake. A week later, he was fired. 2 months after that, his brakes failed on a mountain road. Logan's jaw clenched tight. They silenced him." Margaret nodded, tears shimmering in the firelight. "I could never prove it, but maybe now you can." He leaned back, eyes flickering with flame. "They know I saw something. They were at that warehouse." Margaret's voice softened with warning. "Then they'll come back. But this time you're not facing them alone, Logan. Sometimes justice comes from a man who's already endured hell." He said nothing. Instead, he rose and moved to the window, his breath fogging the glass. Outside, the night lay still, unnaturally so. Snow muffled every sound, blanketing the yard in silence. Then his eyes caught at the faint glimmer of cold metal under the moonlight. A shard of glass lay on the floor. He looked up. The corner window was cracked open, the frame splintered and torn. He stepped closer, cautious. A small hole pierced the wood just above the sill. When he touched it, splinters crumbled away, revealing the twisted head of a bullet embedded deep in the frame. Grace stirred her ears, twitching. Logan clenched his fists, his reflection in the glass rigid and unyielding. "They want to intimidate us," he whispered barely above a breath. But they picked the wrong man. Behind him the fire roared bright, casting long, fierce shadows across the room. Grace let out a low growl, a silent echo of his defiance. By morning the wind had died down, but the cold had only deepened. The valley beneath Willow Road lay buried under a sheet of ice, sparkling beneath a pale sky that held no hint of warmth. Logan Hayes stood at the window, a cooling mug of coffee in hand, eyes fixed on the small bullet hole carved into the wooden frame, a grim reminder of the night before. The warning remained, but so did the fire blazing within him. He'd spent a lifetime obeying orders, keeping silent, just surviving. Now survival was over. He was ready to stand and fight. Grace sat beside him, steadfast and true, staring out at the same endless horizon. Her coat caught the dim light, her eyes clear and unwavering. Scout and Luna tumbled lazily on the rug near the fire, their playful wrestling filled with innocent joy. Logan turned to them, a faint smile softening his rugged, scarred jaw. "You're lucky," he whispered. "You only know this house, not the harsh world beyond it." The things I've faced. After breakfast, he gathered his gear once more, camera gloves, rope, and an old drone he'd bought years ago but never put to use. His gaze settled on Grace. We're going to see this through. Outside, the air was sharp and biting, the kind that turns your breath into fleeting mist before it fills your lungs. The four moved silently through the woods. Grace led the way, nose glued to the earth. Scout followed closely, his youthful curiosity tempered by a deep instinct to stay near. Luna lagged behind, distracted by every whispered sound, the cry of a jay, the soft crunch of snow beneath Logan's boots. They tracked the faint chemical scent that had first drawn them to the warehouse days ago, carried on the wind like rust clinging stubbornly to metal. As they gained elevation into the hills, the snow thinned, revealing frozen earth stained with something darker, thin trickles of oil glistening like liquid shadows against the white. Logan knelt and brushed the edge gently. The scent was acrid, industrial, sharp enough to sting his nostrils. Raising his camera, he began to film. There it is, he breathed. The proof. He aimed the lens towards the stream, where water sluggishly meandered beneath a fragile ice crust, shimmering with unnatural, poisoned rainbows. Vermont Aqua, he muttered under his breath, the name bitter on his tongue. You think no one's watching? He moved with purpose, capturing every sign, the barrels half hidden near the bank, the pipes vanishing beneath the snow. Grace scouted ahead, nose to the ground, circling. Suddenly she halted at the edge of a frozen ravine, body taut and alert. Logan followed her sightline. The earth plunged sharply into a narrow gorge, the ice below gleaming like polished glass. From beneath, the faint murmur of flowing water echoed. Logan crouched, leaning over the edge for a better shot. The instant his weight shifted, the snow gave way beneath him with a soft, treacherous sigh. He slid forward, boots scraping wildly, one hand clawing for grip. The world swirled in white until a fierce tug stopped his fall. Grace's teeth sank into the strap of his jacket, holding fast. Hold on. Easy, girl, he gasped, fingers digging into the ice. Grace growled low, muscles trembling, pulling back with every ounce of her strength. The pups barked desperately behind him, their little paws scraping at the snow as if to lend a hand. Inch by painstaking inch, Logan hauled himself up, collapsing onto solid ground next to her. He stayed there a moment, chest heaving, the cold fire searing through his lungs. Grace pressed close, licking the side of his face, a silent rebuke for his recklessness. He chuckled weakly, breath misting the chill air. All right, you win. He sat up slowly, meeting her gaze. You saved me again. So, I guess we're even now. They took a moment to rest before setting off again. The sun had begun its slow retreat, casting long, stretching shadows among the trees. When they finally reached the farmhouse, the first stars had awakened, sparkling like frost scattered across the night sky. Logan tended the fire, warming his frozen hands, then poured himself a small measure of whiskey. Grace lay curled protectively near the hearth, her body sheltering the pups. He gazed into the flames, their flickering light reflecting in his eyes. If God gives me enough time, he breathed quietly, steady but low. I won't keep silent any longer. As he made his solemn promise to the fire, miles away, Margaret O'Donnell sat at her worn oak desk, her old typewriter clicking softly in the stillness. The faint scent of cinnamon and wood smoke filled her home. Adjusting her glasses, she reviewed the letter she had painstakingly typed 3 times that day, each word deliberate and measured, signed without a name. It spoke of Logan Hayes, a veteran living on Willow Road, who had uncovered undeniable proof of toxic waste buried by Vermont Aqua Corp. Attached were the exact photos Logan had shown her, quietly printed at Sarah's cafe. She sealed the envelope and addressed it to the Vermont News Network, her hands trembling not from fear, but from age and resolve. You always said I'd find my fight again, Harold, she whispered to the empty room, thinking of her late husband. Looks like you were right. Meanwhile, Sheriff Tom Bennett sat alone in his dimly lit office, a desk lamp casting a soft glow over a half-empty coffee cup and a pile of paperwork. The photos Logan had sent, barrels chemical runoff, the company logo lay spread across his desk. His jaw was clenched tight, the stubble on his face throwing shadows that mirrored the worry etched deep in his skin. Tom had carried the badge for 2 decades. He'd witnessed the good it could bring and the harm when it bent to pressure. He rubbed his thumb along the edge of one photo, then leaned back, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Memories of his brother's overdose haunted him. Months of unemployment after the factories closed, despite Aquacorp's promises to keep them open. The bitter irony burned deep inside. When the phone rang, he paused before picking it up. It was Margaret. "Tom," she said softly, "if you still believe in what's right and wrong, now's the moment to choose." He didn't answer right away. Then, in a quiet, weary voice, he said, "Tell him I'm in." Back at the farmhouse, the storm had returned, but this time it was gentler, kinder, as if the valley itself was exhaling steady breath. The wind whispered beneath the eaves. The fire crackled, casting warm light that bathed everything in gold. Logan sat by the hearth, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. Grace lay stretched out beside him, her pups nestled close by. He reached out softly, running his hand through her fur. For the first time in many years, his mind was free from memories of gunfire and desert sands from the ghosts he'd brought home from the war. His thoughts belonged to this place, the creak of the old house, the steady, gentle rhythm of 3 small hearts sleeping near him, and the quiet, forgiving lullaby of the wind outside. His eyelids drifted closed. The fire popped softly. In the warm orange glow, the man who had lost peace finally found it once again. The first sign that nothing would ever be the same came on a bleak, overcast morning when Logan stepped onto the porch and noticed a news van parked at the far end of Willow Road. A blue banner flapped gently in the cold wind, emblazoned with the words, "Vermont News Network." The crisp air carried the faint drone of a generator and the sharp clatter of tripods being assembled in the snow. Grace let out a single bark alert, but unafraid with her tail held high. Scout and Luna peeked shyly from behind her legs, their noses twitching with innocent curiosity. Inside the farmhouse, the warm scent of fresh coffee mingled with wood smoke and the subtle sweetness of baked apples. Margaret sat quietly at the kitchen table. The newspaper spread before her, her glasses perched low on her nose, her hands trembling slightly as she turned the page. "It's all out now," she whispered. "They published everything." Logan took the paper from her hands. The front page bore a haunting photo of the frozen river, its icy surface stained with dark oil. Below it, bold headlines declared, "Whistleblower uncovers Vermont Aquacorp's illegal dumping." His name went unmentioned, but it didn't need to be there. The article laid bare the truth, the toxic waste buried beneath the valley, the barrels discovered in the warehouse, the fabrications in the reports. At the bottom, a single sentence knotted his throat with emotion. A local veteran and his loyal German shepherd first unveiled the evidence. By midday, the story had leapt beyond Vermont's borders. Calls flooded in from reporters in Boston, New York, even Washington. The Environmental Protection Agency launched a formal investigation. And just 2 days later, the staggering news broke that the board of Vermont Aquacorp had been arrested on federal charges tied to environmental fraud. From the quiet shelter of his farmhouse, Logan watched the storm unfold. The phone rang without cease. He ignored most calls, until the sheriff's number blinked on the screen. He answered, hearing Tom Bennett's voice no longer tough, but gentler, humbled. "They want you to testify, Logan. The hearing's in Montier next week. I can drive you there if you want." Logan hesitated, gaze fixed on the fireplace where Grace and the pups were nestled together, calm and comforting. "Do you truly believe they'll listen?" he asked. Tom sighed deeply. "They have to. The river's voice has grown too loud to ignore." A week later, Logan stood in the Grand Vermont State Courthouse's hall. The air held a faint scent of polished wood and old parchment heavy with history. He wore a pristine gray coat. His navy pin shimmered softly on the lapel. Grace sat beside him, steadfast and dark, ears perked, tail wrapped neatly around her paws. Scout and Luna stayed behind with Margaret, who had vowed to keep them warm and safe, The courtroom swelled with townsfolk reporters and families mourning those lost to poisoned waters. The Vermont Aqua Board members sat at the defense table, their suits impeccable, their faces carefully guarded and emotionless. The weight of 100 eyes bore down on Logan as he moved to the stand. His heart thundered once, twice, then slowed to steady resolve. He spoke plainly. "I never sought this fight. I bought a house hoping for peace." But the river refused to stay silent. And when you witness enough lives poisoned, whether on distant battlefields or in your own backyard, and when you've witnessed countless souls falling to poison, be it on a battlefield or right in your own neighborhood, you can't keep pretending you don't catch that scent. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and gentle eyes, leaned in just a bit. "And your dog," Logan offered a soft smile, his gaze drifting down to Grace. She uncovered the first clue. "Her nose is sharper than any of ours." Quiet laughter stirred through the courtroom, melting the tension like a slow breath. As he stepped down, Tom Bennett locked eyes with him and nodded with firm gratitude. 2 days later, the verdict was finally handed down. Vermont AquaCorp was convicted on every charge: illegal dumping record tampering and corporate manslaughter tied to multiple deaths from toxic exposure. The CEO and top executives were taken into custody. The state pledged to restore the river and establish a memorial in honor of the victims. On the Memorial Day, the sky stretched clear for the first time in weeks. Snow melted into slender streams along the sidewalks, flowing into the river which now ran pure and blue. A modest crowd gathered at Riverside Park. Folding chairs faced a wooden podium adorned with white lilies. Margaret O'Donnell stepped forward to speak, dressed in a long navy coat and wearing a silver dove-shaped brooch. Her voice, fragile with age but unwavering, echoed through the chilly air. "Justice," she said, "is not measured by how long we wait. It's measured by whether our hearts hold fast to hope." She paused, scanning the crowd, her eyes shimmering with quiet strength. "We lost good people to silence, but silence breaks where courage begins." Applause swept through the audience. Nearby, Tom Bennett stood, his uniform crisp, his eyes shadowed by regret. When his turn came, he stepped to the podium and said simply, "I was meant to protect this town. I couldn't face the truth because I feared losing the little I had left. I can't undo that, but I swear it will never happen again." After the ceremony, reporters swarmed around Logan. Cameras flashed wildly. A young journalist with curly blonde hair and a bright red scarf crouched beside Grace. "Is this the legendary German Shepherd?" she asked with a warm smile. Grace sat proudly, her tail flicking once. "She's the true hero," Logan said softly. "I only followed her lead." Later that week, Grace was formally honored by the state as a rescue and detection dog. At the small ceremony held outside the courthouse, she wore a blue ribbon around her neck marked K9 Civilian Valor Award. Scout and Luna were there too, now calmer, settled quietly beside Logan's boots. The crowd chuckled as the dogs yipped when the applause began. That evening, back at the farmhouse, the world settled into silence once more. The fire flickered low, casting a warm amber glow across the room. Margaret sat in her usual chair, knitting something small and cozy. "For Scout," she said when Logan asked. "He's growing fast." Tom stopped by on his way home, leaning casually against the doorway with an easy smile. The town